Hey everyone, welcome to our video on fluids. I know we usually talk about fluid and electrolytes together. In another video, we kind of go into the details of all the common electrolytes, and this video is going to focus on the fluid part. Okay? So first, I want to introduce you to some terms that have to do with fluid within the body. We're going to use this image a lot to kind of illustrate. What we're depicting here in this red kind of tube, that's supposed to represent your blood vessel. And then these circular orbs we have around it are the cell. Now you might be thinking, aren't blood vessels made up of cells? And that's true. However, when we have fluid or electrolytes stored within the cell, they're kind of locked away and pulled out of the vessel so they're not circulating within our bloodstream. So that's why we kind of illustrate it as two separate things. Okay? So we have fluid within our body that kind of acts as water and keeps us hydrated that flows through our cells and our vessel. So all of the water that is within the cell itself is called intracellular fluid. Okay, so this blue water that's filled up our cells is intracellular fluid, or ICF. Then we also have fluid that's circulating within our bloodstream, within our vessel, like red blood cells and platelets and other components. And that is called extracellular fluid, or ECF. Okay, so this is our ICF and this is our ECF. We also have something called interstitial fluid, and that's fluid that basically is kind of kept in between our cells. So you can see here it's kind of just put in those little spaces between the cells that we have. And that's our interstitial fluid. It just kind of is in between them. Another term also for extracellular fluid is this fluid right here. It's also called intravascular fluid because, again, it's in your vascular system, it's in your vessel. So if you hear that term, that's this fluid right here, which is also outside of the cell, so it's also considered extracellular fluid. There's something called transcellular fluid as well. That's fluid that's in kind of special areas of our body. So think about the fluid that goes around your spinal cord or your brain, cerebral spinal fluid. That's your transcellular fluid. There's also synovial fluid, which is within your joints. We have fluid around our heart and around our lungs. So those are kind of specialty areas that we have some circulating fluid. So if you hear transcellular, that's what it's referring to. You're also going to hear the term osmosis a lot, and we're going to dive into more detail with osmosis, but whenever we use that term, we're talking about the movement into and out of the cell. So we're going to talk about how things kind of fluctuate in between the two components here, and that movement of items of fluid and electrolytes outside of the cell membrane and back into the vascular system and into your blood vessel, or from the blood vessel into the cell. That is all called osmosis. So that's just another term to know. Okay. We also use a term called filtration. Filtration is very similar to osmosis, except for we're talking about water and solutes moving across the cell membrane. So osmosis we use to describe water movement. With filtration, we're talking about fluid and solutes or other components that are dissolved within that water moving together. Solutes are things like electrolytes that tend to go within the fluid and they move as one piece. Picture it as if you shake some salt into a glass of water. That salt is going to mix with the water and dissolve until it's almost one unit. That salt is then a solute in the water, and if you pour the water, the salt's going with it. So that's what we talk about with filtration. You're also going to hear the term hypervolemia and hypovolemia. Anytime we say hyper with medical terms, we're talking about excess to high. With hypo, we mean low, something not enough, it's too low. So with hypervolemia, we have too much volume. So hypervolemia occurs within the body when there is too much volume right here within the bloodstream. That means that we have too much blood that's backing up, too much fluid that's backing up. We're becoming swollen. We might have edema. That's hypervolemia. Hypovolemia is the opposite. Maybe we're dehydrated. We don't have enough fluid circulating through right here through our bloodstream in the vessel. Instead, we have more of it in the cells and not enough circulating to other parts of our body. So those are terms that you might see when we have too much or too little fluid within the vessel. Okay, the next thing we're going to focus on are types of IV fluids and how that kind of affects this balance with intracellular and extracellular fluid. All right, so let's review what happens when we give different types of IV fluids and how that changes our fluid balance within the body. One important rule to know is that whenever we have fluid going through our vascular system and into our cells, water is always going to move from low concentration to high concentration. Okay, remember we have solutes that are moving within the water. They're kind of moving as one piece, whether it's electrolytes or other blood components, they're all kind of moving together. The more of those solutes we have, the more concentrated that water is. And we will always have movement from low concentration to high. Okay, that'll make more sense in a minute as we walk through our different fluid types. We have 3 different types of IV fluids we can give a patient. One is called isotonic. Isotonic fluids are things that we give most often, like normal saline. You've probably heard of that. Normal saline is an isotonic fluid, meaning it has the same concentration as the fluid within our vessel and within our cells. So whenever we add in isotonic fluids, we have equal movement between the vessel and between the cell. Okay, so here's the fluid we already have, and then the isotonic IV fluids are going to enter both into the vessel, into the vascular system, and it's also going to go into the cells. And it's all kind of an equal movement in all directions. So it's all the same across the board. Okay, that's why it's the most common, isotonic, because that's generally what we need, fluid in the cells and in the vessel. Now let's talk about type number 2. IV fluid type number 2 is hypertonic solutions. Okay, hypertonic fluids have more concentration than the fluid that we have already within our body, within our cells and the vessel. Okay, so we're adding a higher concentration of fluid. It contains more electrolytes, more solutes than what we already have. So when it enters into our body, remember that water is always going to move from low concentration to high concentration. So as it comes into our body system, okay, so as it comes through, these dots are representing all these solutes that we're adding into our vessel right here. So we have lots of different solutes that are very concentrated coming through. Oh, our water almost recognizes, oh, I have to dilute that out. I need to water that down. There's too much there. And it moves from low concentration within the cell to high concentration within the vessel. So water will leave our cells and go into the bloodstream, into our vascular system. Okay, so as you can see, the water is leaving the cells and going into the bloodstream. And when that happens, our cells will actually decrease in size. Our cells will shrink because that water is moving out of it and into the vessel to try to dilute that fluid that we just gave. So hypertonic, higher concentration, and water moves from the cell into the blood vessel. Okay, the last type of IV fluid is hypotonic IV fluids. That's the opposite of hypertonic. Okay, so that means the concentration of the fluid is lower than the concentration of the fluid that we have within the body. So instead, the fluid moving through here doesn't have very many solutes in it. Okay, so we have a lower concentration moving through our vessel than what we already have within our cells. And because of that, again, the water is going to move from low to high. So the vessel now has a lower concentration than the cells. The cells have a higher concentration. So water will move from the blood vessel into the cells. Okay, so as you can see, my cells are filling up with fluid because water is moving from the vessel into the cell. And with hypotonic fluids, our cells will actually grow. They'll actually swell and increase in size because the fluid is moving into the cell away from the vessel. Okay, so just to recap, isotonic solution, same concentration as the fluid in our body, and it moves through the vessel and the cells equally. Hypertonic solution has a greater concentration than the fluid in our body, and so water moves from the cell into the bloodstream and our cells shrink. Hypotonic fluids have a lower concentration than the fluid in our body, and so water moves from the vessel into the cell and the cells expand. Okay, I hope that helps. I know that fluids and electrolytes are very confusing and complicated, but when you break it down, it's not so bad. Keep up the good work. I know you guys can do it.